Okay, let's start identifying what the money is. What is this little object? What is that little object? And slowly, over a period of about 8 weeks, we replicated. I started doing the faxes from Interpol. I found this weird old keychain. The contact lens case, I couldn't find one, so I photoshopped this myself. Medical pass, a French license, a phone card in which I was actually able to find, through somebody at the replica prop farm, the original photo of the cathedral at Chartres and actually plug it into a fake phone card background that I made and laminate it so I could fill this thing. These are all my replicas that go into the bag, the money, the passports, the black cards, and everything. Now, a few weeks ago, Norman Chan, one of the editors of Tested.com, and I, we discussed it in my cave, and it hit YouTube, I think, 10 days ago. And in the last 10 days, we've got over 1.1 million hits, talking about this level of precise obsession. Why, I have no idea. Not exactly true. I have a little bit of an idea, and I'm going to try and frame that idea that I have in a wider context, because I think it's kind of important. If you like my hat, it's this hat. I want to tell you about this hat. This is an exact replica of the hat from Raiders of the Lost Ark, one of the best movies ever made. You know, there's everybody who has ever talked about film has to admit that there's at least 30 films in your top 10. And there's 30 films in your top 10 because there's all these different categories. There's no such thing as just a film that's just good. There's films that are important to you, but maybe you can't watch them anymore because they were part of your development. I saw Brazil like 100 times when I was 20, and I can't watch it again. But it totally informed who I am. And then there's movies that are like you can watch from start to finish no matter when they're on, like The Departed. But I can't defend that as one of the best movies ever made. And then there's Raiders, which is just perfect all around and super fun to sit through. And, well, I'll talk about it a little later, but I always wanted a hat from Raiders and eventually found that these guys make it. These guys, this is Mark Kidder and Steve Gelb. Pretty sure that's the right pronunciation of his name. These guys wanted a perfect Raiders hat as well. And they looked at the original footage of Raiders. And they noticed that the hat in Raiders of the Lost Ark is actually different than the hats in the rest of the movies. And when they studied it, they noticed that one of the key differences is that the brim of your standard fedora is wider than the one that Harrison Ford wears. And it's very noticeable in the film as opposed to the other two films. I represent there's only 2 Raiders films. Just like there's only 2 Star Wars movies. Deborah Nadoolman is John Landis's wife. She designed the original costumes for Blues Brothers and for Thriller, and she did the initial sketch for Indy's main outfit for Raiders of the Lost Ark, establishing, I mean, if you can think of somebody who's had a greater hand in 3 more iconic costumes. And Deborah admitted that, yes, she actually cut the brim of the hat differently in order to give it a different tilt. Make it feel more like a vision of what George Lucas and Steven Spielberg had grown up with, rather than the actuality of the thing. And when they cast around the world for someone that could modify a hat like this for them, they couldn't find anyone to do it. So these 2 guys actually took all the measurements they could from looking at screen reference, and they formed a company. They formed a company called the Adventure Built Hat Company that makes perfect replicas of the Raiders of the Lost Ark hat. They make about 50 hats a year. They're over $600 per hat. It is, without a doubt, the best hat I've ever owned. This hat has sat in the back of my car under blankets, under hot sun for days, and it pops right back, and you'd never even know. In fact, the more beat up it gets, the better it looks. And, you know, it's a magnificent hat. But the story actually gets better, because when they did a RFP around the world for the 4th Raiders film, these guys actually got the contract. Yeah. So that's their hat, the exact same hat as this, sitting on Harrison Ford's head. They made 35 for the film, and they're making more for the next Raiders film. Let's hope it's watchable. They went all the way from fanboy to craftsman to authority, based nothing more than on their original desire. I've already stepped out of the box, haven't I? You gave me a box and I haven't stayed within it. Based on their enthusiasm, they went on this beautiful narrative arc. Now, back to the Replica Props Forum. People post things for sale on this. You can buy movie props, but there are also a bunch of categories: paper props, costumes, film props, studio scale models of ships, spaceships, environments, and things like that. And one of the, probably the most popular item on the Replica Prop Forum right now is making Iron Man armor. So I should go back just a little bit. I was having a conversation with a really brilliant group of makers about 6 months ago. And we were talking about ways in which they'd asked me to come to this meeting to talk about ways in which we could get kids interested in making. And I was bringing up the Replica Prop Forum as an example of the lengths that people will go to make things that they want. And it's a length that I totally understand because these are completely my people. So I want to show you, this is a guy, there's a guy on the Replica Prop Forum. This is just as Iron Man came out, so a few years ago, and he wanted an Iron Man helmet. Now there is a process called Pepakura, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, where a 3D model can be turned into a paper model which can be built, and then people on the Replica Prop Forum take those paper models. Well, check this out. He takes a paper model of an Iron Man helmet, begins to make sure that the planes are all good, then he covers it with Bondo, gets it smooth, keeps on covering it with Bondo, smooths it, primes it, paints it, cuts out the ears, makes a little part. None of this is by anything but hand with like thumbnail files in his house, and eventually makes himself a beautiful fiberglass Iron Man helmet. Now, as a professional maker from film industry, this is the most laborious way possible to make exactly what he's ended up with. It is, and one of the makers, when I showed them this, said, man, that is the long way around. And I agree, but at the same point, this was all that was available to him. That is like $15 worth of materials. And when you're poor and young, labor is the cheapest asset that you have. And I appreciate that. And when I'm thinking about getting people interested in making, I'm thinking about that labor that I expended doing all those weird things when I was a kid. And one of the guys in this group said, you know, I appreciate what it's an example of, but wouldn't it be great if we could get them interested in building their own things rather than on the things that pop culture feeds them? And this hit me to the core, because I both am a deep adept of pop culture, and also am weirdly and, you know, sort of understandably embarrassed by my strange hobby of making costumes and commissioning things and building things that I want for no other reason than I want to connect with an object. So my question is it pop culture? I don't think that it actually matters. I submit that it doesn't matter why you make things. I had to realize that the impetus of the first project that I ever made by myself was to make a James Bond suitcase. I wanted one of those. I grew up on Mission Impossible and James Bond, so I went out to my dad's studio and found this old suitcase, and I put a piece of cardboard in it, and I put lights in it with switches. You know, every Mission Impossible box had a switch that you click to blow shit up. And I wanted one, so it literally had blow that up, and I pretended I had this thing. And that first making project, and then R2-D2, that's a direct line between those things. And that line that made me want to make those is the engine of everything that I currently have in my life today. And I have to pay an obeisance and an appreciative, I have to appreciate that impetus. Bacteria. So I think about this a lot. Bacteria outnumber the cells in our body 10 to 1. Humans think of ourselves as the most successful colony